Welcome to this next installment of our Stepping Stones series, where we are interviewing various members of the GSU faculty in psychology. And Lindsey, we'll just leap right into it.
Okay.
So tell us, sort of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the research that you do, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. I'm Lindsey Cohen. I'm actually an Atlanta native. I've been at GSU since 2004. Um, I'm a professor, currently chair of the department, and my research is in a field called pediatric psychology, and it is Division 54 of American Psychological Association, the field of pediatric psychology, which is a field that looks at topics kind of the crossroads of pediatric medicine and child clinical psychology. So there are a number of things you can look at in that sort of space. In my lab, we work with a variety of patient populations, almost all of them from Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. And some areas of specialty that we study are pediatric pain. So we look at different ways to assess and help kids cope with acute like needle procedure, as well as chronic pain. Chronic pain, part of a disease such as sickle cell disease, or just chronic pain in and of itself in the chronic pain clinic. We also work with other patient populations, such as kids coping and living with diabetes, or parents helping raise their kids with congenital heart disease and other conditions of this sort. Depends a lot on the student's interest and grant funding that we might have. We collaborate with a number of healthcare professionals, physicians, pediatricians, nurses, and other folks at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta.
Marvelous. So tell us a bit about your history. How did you get there? What made you decide you wanted to go on to a PhD in psychology?
So I went to a small liberal arts college in Vermont, and I majored in psychology. I really loved psychology. I found it fascinating to look at the way the scientific method could be applied to look at human behavior and internal experiences that might be harder to study kind of in a lab setting. I always found that interesting. Although I learned about it, I wasn't involved very much in research at that school. After college, I moved back home to Atlanta and for 3 years worked at Bronner Psychiatric Institute and then Eggleston Children's Hospital in a specialty unit called the Medical Psychiatric Unit, which no longer exists. But at the time, it was a unit that specialized in care for kids with behavioral and medical issues. So there might be kids with diabetes who are purposely eating really poorly and ending up
Mhm.
repeatedly in the hospital. Maybe they were depressed or had other issues. Might have been young women with really severe anorexia where they had medical complications, heart issues, and so on. So it was a real interesting unit with a variety of medical and psychiatric issues. When I was there, I became involved in research, both at the unit, working on some studies with cystic fibrosis, as well as volunteering at Yerkes Primate Center, doing work with mother-infant chimp eye gaze coding, which was really challenging, but really interesting. And based on my mentors at Eggleston, as well as Yerkes, I ended up deciding to pursue a PhD in psychology, knowing that that would give me options in teaching, which I really
Mhm.
thought I would like. Therapy, I was interested in clinical psychology, and I thought therapy might be something I eventually did. And definitely, I was interested in research. So the PhD route was one that interested me. But that's
So,
kind of what guided me. Yeah.
and where did you end up doing your PhD?
So I ended up going to University of Georgia.
Oh, okay.
My main mentor at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, his name was Steve Hobbs. He had done his PhD there, and
Hmm.
he was really loved the program. He had a very behavioral perspective, which influenced my sort of burgeoning way I viewed the world. And at the time, University of Georgia was known as one of the
Hmm.
top behavioral oriented programs.
Okay.
And so it seemed like a really good fit. Um, I kind of looked at some other programs in places like Colorado. They weren't really as good of a fit. The lab that
Hmm.
I worked in at Georgia was a really good fit with what I had been doing, which is working with pediatric psychology or kids with medical and psych issues. So when I went to Georgia, the research lab and my sort of interest and background experience were a good fit.
Wow. So when you
Uh,
got to grad school, what do you did you find yourself wishing that someone had told you something? What do you wish someone had told you to sort of prepare you better for grad school, do you think?
um, so I was really good at and enjoyed creative writing. And throughout my
Mm.
undergrad, it was a liberal arts institute. I had done a fair bit of more creative writing and not as much scientific writing. And so that was a steep learning curve for me. I think if I had been a bit more prepared in sort of that type of writing, it would have been an easier
Hmm.
time. I think sort of advice in grad school, maybe not letting kind of perfect be the enemy of good. There are so many times where I thought this thesis has to be career defining, this dissertation has to be career defining, and in hindsight, it just had to be done, and I
Hmm.
could move on to maybe research projects that I thought were, I don't know, more perfect in some way. I could always do later. I just needed to sort of learn the skills in graduate school. And I guess I would have also liked someone to suggest that anytime you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. There
Mm.
were so many different opportunities and not enough time to engage in all of them. And I was quick to say yes. So I was involved in a project looking at centenarians, 100-year-old people traveling around Georgia,
Oh
interviewing
my.
100-year-olds, which I loved. But of course, I was doing stuff with infants and children, and I was all over the
Right.
place, which I thought was really fun, but it also left me a little bit kind of rudderless at times, knowing how I was going to sort of guide my career path. Um,
Was that sort of
I
a
don't
question of
know.
just too many interests?
I, maybe it was. Maybe I could have talked to a mentor more regularly about how do I want to define my career. I mean, obviously, I feel like it's worked out. I'm happy with what I'm doing, but yeah, maybe it was too many interests and not really sure of what exactly. There were so many things I enjoyed, I guess, in graduate school
Hmm.
that it was hard to say no to things. So I'm not really sure what the advice would have been exactly.
So would you feel like that was your biggest challenge? Was figuring out how to prioritize?
Yeah, time management. Graduate school, you're still young
Hmm.
and you're still kind of in undergrad, you're socializing, interacting with people your age, and so there's time management of the fun, the work, the opportunities, the different experiences, and juggling all those things. I always felt like if I had just several more hours to devote to any research, any therapy, any class, I could get so much more out of it, but there just wasn't enough time. So,
No
sort of a
kidding.
challenge figuring out where to realize when enough was enough or good enough was good enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. What? Yeah, it's always a challenge, and that's I think part of the personality of going to grad school as well is being interested in many, many things. And because I know a
Yeah.
lot of us have commented that we find that everything is interesting.
Yeah, and a PhD is not a trade degree by any means. You're
Mm-mm.
at the end of the PhD, you still have lots of options open to you. So you don't really have to decide, I'm definitely going to be this when I grow up, even when you finalize your PhD. Although, depending on what you do, you're more set up for some careers versus others. But an academic career does leave you lots of flexibility to do things you enjoy, a variety of things.
But it sounds like you found a sort of a passion and kept going in terms of the developmental aspects, the children's aspects, and maybe
True.
maybe branching off into pain, but largely you found it kind of early and broadly stuck with it.
That's true. And sometimes it was probably guided by my interest, and sometimes it might have been guided by happenstance. And,
Hmm.
um, as you do something more of it, you tend to get better and better and seek that out more. So as my kind of expertise and competence and interest in pain grew, I would seek out those studies and they would be
Hmm.
easier for me too. And
Yeah.
the more you get into something, the more you learn the nuances and the intricacies, and it becomes more fascinating the more you
Oh, there's
study
no
it, there's so
question.
much more you can do.
No question. I've just we've talked to obviously people whose careers have taken many twists and turns as they've changed completely, and then there's others where it's like, okay, we're just sort of adding to a foundation that was, that was sort of identified early and has stayed with you.
Yep.
throughout, which is really interesting. So what was your biggest challenge? Well, obviously, biggest challenge was really time management. Were there people who really said something to you that was critical for you to keep going? Because we've all faced times where it's like, oh gosh, if I could just finish this up, or why did I do this? You know?
Yeah, there was a friend of mine in graduate school who was really keen on learning and doing everything solo, and she really didn't enjoy collaborating as much. And I actually think I saw her struggles, and it actually made me realize that relying on sharing and collaborating
Hmm.
and learning from my colleagues. My roommate, for example, loves statistics, and I found statistics really challenging and dry, but he would sort of help me translate statistics and understand statistics in a way that I could enjoy it and get more out of it. And vice versa, I helped him some with actually time management
Hmm.
and some other classes we had together, like history, things he didn't enjoy as much that I found kind of fun to learn these facts and trivia pieces. So I think working and collaborating with others was something that really helped. Just senior students in my lab were far less intimidating than faculty mentors. So I would ask them for advice on scientific writing. They'd give me examples of their thesis or dissertation,
Uh,
which was a great scaffolding way
yeah.
to start to write my thesis or dissertation.
Oh, there's no question. No
Yeah.
question.
So really my peers and colleagues, graduate students, were maybe the key support system for me. And uh,
Yeah. Did you guys have writing groups or things like that that
um,
to
so
work
for
together?
the prelims general exam, I was
Mm,
with two other people, and we kind of regularly met to keep each other studying and on schedule. Applying for an internship, there are a handful of people, and we would share statements. So it's different. There were different small groups that
yeah.
would form to help each other through harder pieces. I never had a writing group. I always enjoyed writing, so that wasn't as hard to like make myself write. Finding the
Hmm.
time was always the harder piece, but once I had the time, um, I never a writing group wasn't as didn't seem to be something I needed.
But definitely the
Uh,
group activities. That's something a lot of us
yeah,
sort of find that transition where in K through 12, you can't stand group activities.
yeah, yeah. I enjoyed studying with groups, like quizzing
Yeah.
each other, learning from each other, learning, which I think is part of the reason I also enjoy teaching because I think in those
Hmm.
small groups we would teach each other topics and um, just translate concepts into more like different examples and different ways to understand concepts. I found that really helpful to my like studying and learning throughout
Oh,
graduate
no
school.
question. No question. So was there a particular mentor who stood out for you?
Um, so our program when I was a graduate student was very much a mentor-mentee program. So my main
Hmm.
mentor who I'd meet with at least once a week, he was a very good writer and
Mm,
he really helped me sort of go from creative writing to scientific writing and then being able to later incorporate creative writing back into my scientific writing, which was
hmm.
a many year and still ongoing process. Um, there were senior students in my lab who were very mentor-like in various domains. And then in the clinic, we had upper level students who we had a vertical team doing therapy.
Mm.
And some of those students were really they just guided me and provided really good models on how to do therapy. We could watch the videos and watch through the windows. And I learned lots about therapy through those upper level students.
Mm. Because that's something that we don't really see as undergrads is sort of that mentoring, that example, the role
Yeah.
model example of the research to scientists that you really do see in graduate school. It sounds
Yeah,
like
in
you had a
graduate
very
school,
strong environment for that.
yeah, my mentor, he would, and in hindsight, maybe it was a good way to do it, but he often
Mm.
would not edit my writing on his own time. When I came into the office, it was actually paper, he would break it out and he would hand edit and think out loud as he's editing. He would pull out his like dictionary encyclopedia and look stuff up. But I really got to see exactly how he did the writing
Mm.
process and why he would move things. And he was a good writer, and I learned so much just watching him, even though it was not the most efficient way to move through a thesis or dissertation. We'd only get through, say, 4 or 5 pages where he would be making his handwritten comments. I
Oh
would get
my
to
goodness.
see, and then based on what I saw, I'd say, "Hey, can I send you a a cleaner draft because I could jump
Yeah.
ahead knowing what the how he was
Yeah.
organizing it and how he would want it to look later.
Oh, that sounds like a great
Mhm.
example because you really can sort of say, oh, well, okay, given what you were doing, I can keep doing that myself and go
Yeah,
forward.
the other students in the
Fantastic.
lab and I would all sort of, in hindsight, I like it, but we'd all complain because we'd have a little shelf with our name and he would stick our paper in there and he said, next time we meet, I'll pick up where we left off. We're like, oh, if he
This is
did it
going to
on
take
his time, I could get
forever.
it back and move through much more quickly. But
Yeah.
there are pros and cons to each style, and you learn different things, I think,
Yeah.
with different approaches. That was before track changes really existed in the world. So,
Well, you end up sort of
uh,
internalizing your mentor, internalizing your advisor, and so you can hear them in the back of your head going, "No,
yes,
don't say it that way."
yeah.
Fascinating. Um, okay, there's so one of the other questions that we had is for many of us who came into graduate school, there would be one thing that we don't, that everybody else around us seemed to understand. And it was very embarrassing to admit that we didn't understand it. So for many of us, we just sort of sat there going, yeah, yeah, I know what that is. Uh-huh. Was there something like that for you in your experience? We're trying to collect
Oh,
examples of that.
there were a bunch of things. There were a bunch of times where I had aha moments on learning concepts, but there were a number within the statistics realm. And my
Mm,
roommate for 2 years of graduate school, he was in the applied or IO psychology, and he loved stats. He would take every stats class. And for me, I was thinking stats, I had to find out what was the right or wrong statistical analysis for a given question. And at some point, he told me, well, you can do this from a ANOVA or regression perspective, or you can do it. There are multiple ways to answer your question. It just depends on your theoretical or conceptual understanding. And that was kind of mind blowing for me that there wasn't just one right statistical answer. And then he loved discussing theory and concepts and
mm,
formulations about statistics, which was foreign to me. But then I started to see from his perspective a bit. And I mean, he really enjoyed that. And that was a big aha moment for me when
mm.
I realized statistics is not just a tool to apply to answer your question, but you need to carefully pick how the statistical approach you're, using to answer questions and guide your sort of formulation at the outset. That
Yeah.
was, uh,
Oh, that would be eye-opening. Absolutely eye-opening. And I can see how you have to make that transition because I know in the undergraduate statistics classes, it's always which test goes with which question. And to some extent,
mhm.
that's going to be true. But as you get into the more complex questions, it's like, well, there's a choice of methods here, depending on exactly what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we've got to try to communicate that. Marvelous,
Yeah,
marvelous.
when he told me that this could be answered either sort of your ANOVA approach or
Yeah.
regression approach, either one, you'd come to the same answers, the same kind of analysis regardless. It kind of blew my mind. So I really thought those were distinct and did
Fundamentally,
not overlap. And
fundamentally different things. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. No, they're
um,
actually the same underlying model.
mhm.
Oh, you came to that early. I didn't figure that out until much later.
Oh,
I
it may
think
have
I
been
was a
my,
postdoc before I was like, oh,
uh,
there's this thing called a general linear model.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, very exciting. All right. So, any other advice that you would give to people who are considering a PhD in psychology?
Um, I would say part of the job of a graduate student is to complain. There are definitely stressors and difficulties, but I would say that at the end of the day, if you look back, you're actually being paid to earn a PhD and you're around some of the brightest, passionate people you're going to come across in your life, all in one area, and to just enjoy and take advantage of that moment in time where you can interact with people who are passionate and highly knowledgeable in a really distinct area. They'll know it in and out. And if you go have lunch or dinner with them and talk about their area, you can learn so much. And throughout those years, whether it's 6 or 7 years in graduate school, the whole time you're being paid, not a lot, but you are being paid to earn a degree, which is quite different from other models like law school or med school. Um, and that it's something that's, I think, is really great. When I was a graduate student, we would complain about the low pay. But then later, when I talked to people and they said, wait, you were paid to get the degree. You weren't paid for the degree. It was sort of a wake up call. Yeah, that's really something that's really nice and
Yeah.
not to be taken for granted.
Yeah, definitely to be
Yeah.
appreciated at the time as well. And I think you're right about the environment and the being with people who are passionate about what they do and what they're thinking
Hmm.
about. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah,
marvelous.
going to students' practice thesis or practice dissertations and hear them talk about it and ask questions and realize their depth of knowledge and reading
Hmm.
on a particular topic that I knew nothing about. I was like, wow, they really are down the rabbit hole on that topic. They really know it. And you could learn so much from each other.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time on this.
Sure,
And
this was fun.
yeah, it is fun, isn't it? I'm looking forward to doing the rest of them. We're going to put them all, on a YouTube channel somewhere where you can get access to them and share them.
Oh,
And
awesome.
yeah, we'll let you know how that goes.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.